everyone. Welcome to the 239th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have an awesome show. We're going to be talking about Tuya, the IoT platform company, hubless Hue bulbs for Samsung SmartThings, all about the continuing fallout from the, Nest, Google, everything, a little bit about Google's Coral AI developer board, and a hack against smart speakers. Plus, on the industrial side, we've got news from NVIDIA, and it's pretty cool. We also have a smart toilet, a Nest Mini review, and we're going to be talking to Rose Eveleth, who is creator of the Flash Forward podcast, about what science fiction can teach us about the future of technology and IoT. We're also going to be hearing from sponsor Nutanix, and got a little dose of the holidays coming up as well. So, get ready for fun. But first, let's hear from one of our sponsors. The IoT Podcast Hotline is sponsored by Affero. Why do you need the Affero platform? Because you're building multiple smart products at scale. You need end-user experience that amplifies your brand, security and data integrity that you can trust, response times measured in milliseconds, consistent development and technology reuse, and a single mobile app for all of your devices. This is all built on the 5th largest patent portfolio in IoT, and you want it all. And Affero delivers. So get started at affero.io. That's AFERO.io. All right, Kevin, we're going to start this off with Tuya. I just like saying Tuya.
It's a good name. I agree.
Which apparently means graffiti in Chinese.
I did not know that. Interesting.
I didn't either, but Google Translate makes things very exciting. So let's talk about Tuya. They, this week, had an event in Shenzhen talking, it was basically what looks like their user conference, and they announced the news that we had actually covered, that they had hired Jeff Immelt, the former GE CEO, as the chairman of their Global Strategic Committee. So that's where that GE executive ended up. They also said a couple other things. The most notable, I thought, was that their powered by Tuya products are now in 90,000 models. And that's an increase of nearly 300% year over year. And Tuya,
Yowza.
I know, that's huge, right? And so these are brands that are like, you know what? I do not want to deal with all the telemetry, the commissioning, decommissioning, all that fun stuff about IoT. They're just going to hire a third-party platform. Ayla is one of these companies. We've talked to Pepper IoT. They're another one of these. And Tuya is also one, and they're based in China, which has given us some pause in the past, but we're actually going to have one of their executives on the show to talk about that very soon. This is an astonishing amount of growth.
Yeah.
So, also as part of that, Tuya and Lenovo, they've announced a partnership. They will be working together, both in Lenovo's smart products, and they're going to create this, they call it an AI plus IoT product empowerment model. And my hunch is this is basically fancy for doing some of the back-end stuff that Google Assistant is doing.
And that actually makes sense. I've been wondering why I've been seeing so many Lenovo smart devices, such as cameras, bulbs, and things, across the FCC over the last, 6 months or so. I'm like, what are they doing? Why is Lenovo getting involved? Or who are they going to work with? Now we know.
Ta-da! And Schneider Electric has chosen Tuya as its underlying platform in their Wiser smart product. So these are light switches and other those related products. And it's going to start in Asia.
So they're not just smart, they're wiser. I get it.
Exactly.
Ooh.
And for closer to home news for a lot of our listeners, Tuya and Samsung SmartThings are going to do a collaboration, and Tuya's products will be part of the Samsung's Works with SmartThings certification, which means you've got 90,000 new products, apparently, that now will work with SmartThings. And Tuya, like one of the bigger brands that you will see Tuya as part of is Mercury Innovations. That's Walmart's smart products, I guess, connected. You can buy them in the Walmart stores. It's plugs, it's light switches. I feel like there are a few other things in there, cameras. So that is a lot of news on the Tuya front, and I know you guys constantly ask us about them, so I thought we should let you know. They're doing well.
And related, only because you mentioned SmartThings.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. SmartThings has announced a strategic partnership with Signify, which is the brand behind Philips Hue. And we knew as of, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago that Philips Hue changed their bulbs or their new bulbs to use Bluetooth instead of a different radio frequency that required the bridge. You no longer need the bridge if you buy the newer Philips Hue bulbs with Bluetooth. Well, SmartThings says, hey, you can now use those Philips Hue bulbs right with our SmartThings mobile app, no hub required.
Woo-woo! I will say I'm a little ambivalent about this just because my experience with Bluetooth bulbs has been not awesome. Oh, they don't work everywhere, but I'm hoping with Bluetooth mesh, these things will be solved. We'll see.
Yeah, and just because this happened last week and is also related, the Made for Google partners, actually, is it Made for Google or Made for Nest?
No, it's Made for Google, remember?
That's right, yeah. But yet they're calling all the products, but the branding is all Nest, but whatever, hey. So the announcement last week was that Philips Hue bulbs could also work with Google, no hub required, but in addition to Philips Hue, LifeX, Sylvania, and Sengled all work with Google products, no hub required.
Yay! And let's talk about Google because we have been talking what feels like forever, but it's really only been 4 or 5 months, about Google killing its Works with Nest program. And it did this. We've talked about why, security reasons, but people are not happy. And there's a couple of reasons. One, normal people are not happy because they have to switch their account over from a Nest account to a Google Assistant account. So that upsets people.
Yeah.
2, that's a little messy. But 3, companies that have worked with Nest historically, like home builders, are upset because now, instead of telling people to download the Nest app, you have to tell people to download the Google Assistant app, which, if they're on Android phones, great. But if they're on iPhones, they have no idea what this is. They're not interested. And so builders are apparently ditching Nest, according to Bloomberg. This makes sense. And actually, I've talked to builders, and a lot of them have actually been putting Honeywell branded products like the T5 or now we're all the way up to like the T9 and 10 thermostats in homes, partly because of these sorts of fears. They didn't want to force people to be one or the other. I will also say that I've heard from people in the industry who build smart home products that they're frustrated with this Google move because it also, and this hasn't been too widely reported, but it also forces them to give their data that they give, like if it's a lock company, the status about your lock goes now to Google. It used to be that the lock company controlled that data when they worked with Nest devices, but now Google gets everything. And this is part of a land grab for home data by the Amazons and the Googles of the world. And Google says they're doing this for privacies. You know, they want to control the data, so they ensure that your weird, dicey smart home device that you bought from China does not do anything bad, is their logic. But if you're a legitimate, brand that has a history of not abusing people's data, then this gets a little...
Yeah. I don't know that Google really thought through this whole changeover. I say that for a couple of reasons. One is everything you just mentioned just now. 2, the whole account migration. We've heard horror stories. We've experienced the challenges there. And 3, I just think it comes down to them looking like they want to be a data silo for this information when it seemed more open in the past.
Yes. And I do understand their security concerns.
As do I.
But I'm also like, maybe instead of being a data silo, you become this like data broker, or maybe the benefit you add isn't tied to owning all the data. Maybe it's tied to protecting data that's actually pretty complicated to protect, which is hard to do and a very googly problem to solve. But that's not the way they went. Yeah. Okay. Also, we've heard reports of Google Actions, and VoiceBot.ai has been doing a good job covering this, but Google Actions disappearing and things getting even reputable brands, well, they're not smart home brands, but Actions like by Procter & Gamble and companies like that getting shut down for a little bit. And it looks like what's been happening is Google shut a bunch down for security reasons. Most are now back up. But there was a significant lack of communication, it sounds like, to the developers who are putting out actions, even the bigger brands. And so I would say what we should learn here is, yay, Google, for taking security steps, especially since you're locking down a lot of data under the, I guess, auspices of helping secure it. But the next step is to actually communicate with people when you do that, and ideally before you do that. And it didn't sound like that happened here.
Yeah.
So,
Not good.
Well, especially if you're going to make a business out of this. And it's not really clear if there is a business to be had here. So we'll see. We're going to stay in the smart home, but then we'll have one more Google thing out there. But the Google Home and Madam A devices, so Amazon Echo devices, speaking of security, they have, well, Kevin, why don't you talk about it?
Yeah, this is not good. This is both the Madam A products as well as the G products, the home products. There have been some security issues that were reported well over a year ago, and they haven't really been addressed. And essentially, this is like a whole new phishing attack, phishing and eavesdropping. This is just not good. So apparently all a hacker had to do was put in a special ASCII character inside of some app that runs on the Google or the Madam A platforms. And that would signal to the device to have long periods of silence, but yet the microphone was still active. So there was some demos in the past week about how to carry out a phishing attack. I can't imagine most people would fall for that. Like, what skill is going to say, please repeat your password to me for your bank? But I suppose it's possible. I mean, anything's possible. But definitely eavesdropping. This is a major issue from an eavesdropping standpoint. And we already know that people are not happy about these devices listening in when they don't think they're listening or having those conversations shipped off to third parties. So
the biggest concern I have actually about putting these things in my house has not been about Google or Amazon misusing the data. It's the fact that I'm creating an open channel or a hackable channel into my home that is potentially accessible, just like this.
Right. Well, you're trusting the platform provider, in which case it's Google and Amazon in this case, to vet these things and make sure that that's not going on. But you're literally talking about one character in what could be thousands of lines of code. That's hard to spot, you know?
Yeah. So this is why I understand why people wouldn't want to do this. And it's also why I understand that you want physical access and control over things like microphones and camera covers. So that's why, like, Amazon, their design that actually when you turn the mic off, it physically cuts off that circuit is so good. And why I'm glad they're doing camera covers. So now we just need Google to do the same. Some of their devices do have physical camera covers, but I'll have to ask about how their microphones are designed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Speaking of Google, see what we did there? Haha. In the industrial IoT / edge AI / we just like to play with machine learning.
and abbreviations.
Yes. So many abbreviations. So Google's Coral AI Developer Board moves out of beta, and Coral is a Raspberry Pi-like board that has Google's TPUs, which are their TensorFlow processing units.
At the edge.
At the edge. Yes, this is designed for basically running machine learning models, and people love it. And I would say it's probably close to something like Intel's Movidius is more, well, no, Movidius might work for machine learning. It's more computer vision, but that is a form of machine learning. But probably most analogous to NVIDIA's Jetson, which is basically a machine learning model on a stick that uses NVIDIA's GPUs. So
Google announced this back in March, and as you said, it's out of beta now. So it's been in beta for 6 months. The company has taken feedback from the beta testers, and now anybody can just go out and buy the Coral board. It's $149, which is what it was during the beta process as well. Or you can just buy the detachable Coral system on module for $114. So that gets you the Edge TPU with a processor, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth memory, and storage if you want to attach it to a different board, perhaps.
All right. And speaking of the Edge.
That's rather daunting.
I am excited. NVIDIA this week announced a bunch of partners for its edge computing platform. This is a platform they announced back in May. It's EGX, and they actually pronounce it the NVIDIA EGX platform, just to make my life a little difficult. Probably because there is actually already an EdgeX platform. Believe it or not, it's an open it's an open group for transferring industrial data. Anyway, you guys don't need to know that because we're talking about NVIDIA. So their EGX platform now has several partners: Red Hat, Microsoft, and Ericsson. The partnership with Ericsson is all about building 5G computing at the edge. And one of the things with 5G networks is it requires a lot of computation in the edge at the base station to manage all of the antennas. So all of that device to base station communication, it's a lot. There are more antennas. There are more ways to divide up your spectrum to optimize it for data flow. There's a lot going on there. So you need some really powerful computing. And so Ericsson plus NVIDIA, that's a big deal for that. With Microsoft, they're announcing a tie-in with Microsoft's Azure IoT Edge. So this is where you can send all of your IoT sensor data from IoT Edge and compute the heck out of it on the EGX device. This is probably overkill for many people today, but as data increases, this is where we're going to see some more action, maybe. I guess NVIDIA is making a bet that we're going to need this. And then the Red Hat partnership is they're tying with Red Hat's OpenShift platform for Kubernetes containers. And basically all this is going to do is your Kubernetes containers will work with NVIDIA chips and on this EdgeX computing platform. This is mostly geared, again, towards the telco world. So unless you're operating a network, don't worry so much about that. But want to stick all that in context for you. And yeah, it's big. It's big news. All right. Moving right along to
toilets.
Toilets.
Yes, and I love this. And I'm not so I would not be surprised if you buy one of these, quite honestly. But let's tell everybody what it is first.
Okay. Okay, Kevin. I don't know how to reply to that. So this is a company called Shine Bathroom. And they are building a device that you put in your bathroom. There's a device you stick on the inside of your toilet bowl, and you stick an outside device, another device on the outside of your toilet, on top of it, next to it, whatever. And when you flush, after you flush, this shoots a stream of ultraviolet purified water down the sides of the bowl to deodorize it and clean it.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll have to refill the water container thing. I don't really.
Yeah.
I'm like.
It's a water container. That's correct.
It's a water container / purifier thing, and it'll shoot that right down into your toilet bowl, and you'll have to refill that every now and then. And it's not just for cleanliness. It's also going to do some analysis on not what you're producing as the person, but on your toilet. Like, is it leaking? Is it, I guess, performing up to par? Kevin, help me.
Yeah, well, sometimes with the older flappers, the toilet will just continue running and wasting water. And basically, there's a sensor that you also attach to the water line. So that's how it detects if it's, the toilet's still running, or maybe it's not, maybe there's a leak, etc. So there's an app that will notify you that there might be a problem. It'll even diagnose the problem, and if it can ship you a repair kit, because apparently it's smart enough to tell what the issue may actually be.
Yes, and as I have learned in covering the smart home water monitoring world, toilets that slowly leak or just kind of have inefficient flappers, they waste a lot of water.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
They've done a couple things that are smart and noteworthy here. One is they focused on a majority, like a huge majority of the leaks, maybe not a huge majority, but a majority of the leaks are actually related to leaky toilets. So that's good. So they're solving a big problem with one device. Two, they've solved the issue. A lot of US bathrooms do not have power by your toilet for a variety of reasons. This is battery powered. You don't have to deal with a lot of toilet touching. And, it's not hard to replace a flapper on your toilet, but,
No.
You don't have to mess with any of the inside the toilet bowl. I mean, you have to stick and I should tell you, it's not UV, it's electrolyzing the water.
It's electrolyzed water. That's the thing. I mean, who really wants to clean the toilet bowl? Nobody does. And just to be clear, this doesn't clean the bowl after each use. You actually tell it when. And it's got Madame A integration. You can say, Madame A, clean the toilet. And she does.
People will buy it just for that. So
yes.
This is being sold via Indiegogo, which means this is crowdfunded. You can buy this for about $99. There's a few deals that you could still possibly get, but we'll see. It will ship, though, February 2020, so you've got some time to wait and have to still manually use that toilet brush. The other thing to note about this company is that it was founded by the folks who founded Tracker. And Kevin, you loved the Tracker.
Still do. Have one on the mailbox key. Yep.
And what I found was interesting about the story was that the Tracker folks had left, Tracker rebranded, and now Tracker's apparently on its third team of executives. So
yeah,
that doesn't sound great for your Tracker, my friend.
It does not. And add into the fact that Apple will have its own tracking bits for iOS 13, and that's going to make life even harder, I think.
Yeah. But
hey, you could have a clean toilet bowl.
A clean toilet bowl. Thank goodness they've tackled this essential problem. I don't know, Kevin. I don't know if I would buy this or not. I
thought you might.
I feel like some Clorox and a toilet brush. I mean, you're still going to need the toilet brush. You know what I mean?
Maybe I should tell my wife about this and see what she thinks.
Yeah.
Maybe I will buy one. Or 3.
Or 3. Go in the good toilet. All right.
Well, yeah, we have 3 toilets, so why not,
All right. Let's see. Oh, let's talk about the Nest Mini, because you've had a week with that thing, and I'm curious to see what you think.
And it's a lot cheaper than a Shine toilet cleaner at only $49. Yes, I do have the Nest Mini. I've been using it for a week and have a written review. I hate to do a written review for something that has so much audio capability, but it's the only way I can do it, really. I tell you what, I can't say that I've measured the 2x bass improvement that Google claims. They say they have measured it, but the sound is noticeably richer, fuller, has more thump, especially if you use the little screw hole in the back and mount it on a wall, because now the sound is coming right at your ears off the wall and being bounced off. I am mostly impressed. I mean, it's the same product from the outside, but on the inside, it has a couple nice new features, new capabilities. There's an ultrasonic sensor that when you put your hand near, really close actually, to the Nest Mini, the lights light up. Both the left and right LEDs
so you know
for
what
the
to press for like volume and stuff, because that was always a pain.
It's kind of hard to pick the left and right side of a circle. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's very helpful and very cool. Additionally, there is the machine learning chip inside that will make this work better with natural language processing on device and also allow you to control devices around your house without going out to the cloud. But all I've noticed so far is that some things are quicker. Some commands seem to be a little quicker than before. Maybe because they're local. I just don't know which device makers have taken advantage of the local SDK for home. So it's hard to say. I think if you're buying this and you don't see improvements in, say, your lights coming on faster when you say, please turn on the lights, it's probably because of the brand. It hasn't been updated with the SDK yet. But I would imagine all of the works with Google products will actually show faster response times. So
soon.
I like it. I mean, there's no reason not to buy it if you're going to go buy a former Home Mini, which are still available at the same price. Yeah, they're probably going to go on sale now as they get rid of them, but I wouldn't do it. I don't think so. I think I'd buy the $49 Nest Mini because the sound is noticeably better. You've got the promise of faster on-device processing. So, yeah.
Yeah, do that. Although some people may be in the market for a new Google Nest device because apparently a software update has bricked the Google Home devices for a couple of customers. So we're still waiting to see how that pans out, but users on Reddit have complained, and the Register did a lovely story rounding this up. As usual, Google is not really responsive. So we'll see. Okay, Kevin, are you feeling in the holiday mood?
I'm not a big fan of the holidays. You can sing all you'd like.
Yes. All right. It is time for the Internet of Things podcast hotline, which is sponsored by Affero. With the 5th largest IoT patent portfolio in the world, Affero provides a proven IoT platform that doesn't risk your brand. Affero customers have experienced as much as an 80% reduction in time to market and 10x higher activation rates. You can learn more at affero.io. Okay, welcome to the IoT Podcast Hotline, where we answer your questions. If you would like us to answer your question, just give us a call at 512-623-7424. And if you do that, you will be entered to win this month a Wise Sense and Wise camera set. So super fun. Call us. You are automatically entered to win, and that closes at midnight Eastern on October 31st. I guess we don't ship internationally, so we ship to the US and Canada.
So there's 1 week left, and I'd say odds are pretty good that you could win because people haven't been calling as much lately.
Yeah, what's up with that, you guys? Give us a shout.
I don't know. Nobody wants to talk to us.
Also, I would just throw out there, if you're a PR person, please do not call the podcast hotline.
You're not getting entered.
You don't get entered to win unless you have a question that is related to not Stacy has not called me back. So just throwing that out there for any PR people who are listening. Or if you're friends with PR people, tell them. Okay, this week's podcast hotline, it's about Christmas lights, you guys.
Well, it's about holiday lights.
Sorry, it is about holiday lights. That is important because
Festivus, for example.
Well, it sounds like this person wants to celebrate all of the holidays with lights, and I, for one, am with her on this. So let's hear it.
Hi, Stacy and Kevin. My name's Carissa, and I am in Nebraska, and I am on the hunt for holiday lights that I can use outside, but preferably ones that come in some sort of LED strip so that I can customize them for all of the holidays instead of just traditional Christmas. I would appreciate your tips. Thank you.
Oh, Clarissa. I wish I had better news for you because every year since I started this beat, so every year since 2012, I have been searching for smart Christmas lights or smart holiday lights. The first thing I did actually with my first connected device, which was a Wemo plug, was actually use it on my Christmas tree. So I feel you so much here. I have terrible news.
And this comes after probably more time spent researching the answer to this than actually doing this podcast.
Yes, because again, near and dear to my heart. So I used to have connected Christmas lights that I bought in probably 2015. They were iTwinkle lights. They were made by GE. They are no longer made. And I had them for 2 years. The downside with them was they were outdoor rated, individually addressable lights. They were incredibly expensive. They were like $60, maybe $80 a string. And the lights kept getting broken because I set them up along my pathway. And when that happens, you couldn't replace them. So that's something to think about. But I did keep them up for a while, and then the app was terrible and the Bluetooth was very dodgy. And this is a very consistent theme you're going to see. So since those dark days of nothing and then the iTwinkles, we have come not very far.
Yeah, because there have been some options that seem to have come and gone. We did find some Illumi light strips that would work outside.
Yes, the big theme that has changed is light strips. And there are 3 reputable brands of light strips. And some of them are definitely outdoor rated. They are all very expensive.
Yes.
And not all of them have individually addressable things. So we'll break it down for you.
And individually addressable, just for people who don't know, that would be making each specific light the color that you want, not just the one strand being a color.
Yes. So your first option is the Philips Hue, and these are actually outdoor rated. But These are 2 meters of light strips plus the starter kit is going to cost you $90. And those
Yikes.
2 meters are only one color. You can, however, connect your light strips, I think up to 5, and you can make those work as like, you can connect them that way, if that made sense. That did not make a lot of sense, but
You can string them together.
yes, but you do that in the app. So that's one. And again, expensive. The LifeX light strip is actually, I believe, 8 addressable zones per strip. Each individual strip is 2 meters. You can extend up to 10 meters, so that's 5 strips. And these are also $90. I'm going to say I like the LifeX lights better because their green is a little truer for the holidays, but Philips has probably gotten a little better on that. They used to have not an awesome green. Or not an awesome turquoise, actually, is what it was. But LifeX is Wi-Fi. Philips goes with their hub. And then we found, and the LifeX, they are not outdoor rated that we can see. So that's a risk, especially in Nebraska where it's cold. Just cold.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then we also found the Illumi light strips, Kevin.
We did, and there's some concern that is Illumi still in business? These are hard to find. They would meet your requirements, but I got to be honest, I probably would just cross them off the list right away because I'm not seeing a lot of places that sell them or support them. So roughly in the same price range. We've got 2 other better options, in my opinion, that we just talked about.
So that's the light strip market. And now we're moving on to the traditional LED holiday light
String
strips.
lights. Yes.
You have options. There are tons of options that are really reasonably priced that have a controller that is Bluetooth enabled that allow you to change the entire string. So we're not going to talk about those because that's not what you want. We are going to talk about 2 options. One is Lumen Play that look, I'm not kidding, the app and the lights themselves look exactly like the iTwinkle lights. So somewhere in China, there is a factory that changes its name every couple of years, is my guess.
I don't believe that. How could that be?
But the reviews on those are the same thing as I talked about, dodgy Bluetooth, etc. They are reasonably priced. These are outdoor ready. So they talk about it being music enabled. I'm going to tell you that the music is only enabled when it's playing from your smartphone. It's not like, unless you're going to stick your smartphone out there with a big Bluetooth speaker, it's not the music you're really thinking of.
We don't recommend that.
Yeah. You also, this is not mesh. So if you want to change the lights color, you have to go by your front door if they're outdoors or by your back door, wherever. You have to get near where the controller is to actually control them and change the thing. So
could there possibly be a similar option with Wi-Fi?
My goodness, Kevin, there is. There are the twinkly lights. And I don't name these folks, but
no. I
just bought these. I got so excited. This is the first thing that I've seen that is like maybe, but they're also very expensive, I should tell you. So the Lumen Play are like $24 for, I think, 13 feet of light. It's only like 20 or 13 light bulbs. I can't remember. But the twinkly lights for $181 on Amazon, you can buy 225 LED string lights that are individually addressable if you have and they also talk to Google Assistant, and it has what they call smartphone camera mapping. And I'm going to tell you right now that the reviews say this works well with iPhones and terribly with Android. So what I'm going to do is I've ordered them. I'm going to see what I can do with these. They are outdoor rated, so indoor and outdoor. So you can either buy them now in a string of hope like me, or you can wait about a week or so and I will tell you how they feel.
Right. And then the camera mapping is what they're calling, or the function of it is Twinklys computer vision. So it measures the spatial position of each LED bulb. So imagine, if you would, wrapping these around a Christmas tree, you would then use the app to spatially map where each light is on your tree. And then you've got all these dots in the form of a Christmas tree on the app, and you can tap each dot and set each light color if you want individually, or just set them all the same, do whatever you'd like.
It's very exciting. I'm not going to lie.
If you say so. Yeah.
So.
Just nod along with her, folks. Yes, it's very exciting.
Okay.
Yes.
Literally, for the last 6 years, I've been looking for these sorts of things. I will say, if you buy the twinkly lights, you have to buy the strings. Like you can combine them in the app, but they make different lengths of strings. So they have like 450. They have 56 is the shortest it looks like, and 400 may be the longest.
400 lights, yep, on a string.
That's 290.
Right. Yeah, you could buy two 225s. Each one would need its own separate outlet, but you could quote unquote join them in the app to act as one string of lights that are with all, again, individually addressable bulbs.
Yes. So those are your options, Clarissa. I hope I have helped you, and I'm really sorry I don't have better news. But, this is...
You got options. It's going to cost you, but you got options.
You've got bad, cheap options and maybe okay, expensive options, but they're really expensive.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that concludes the news portion of the show. Please stay tuned for a super fun discussion with Rose Eveleth, who is the creator of the Flash Forward podcast. We're talking about bringing science fiction writers in to help envision the future for tech policy or even business purposes. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And mostly just about science fiction and how it influences the development of tech. It's a really fun conversation. Plus, you get some good book recommendations. All right. And now, a word from our sponsor. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Nutanix, and I have Sachin Vagani with Nutanix here to talk about the company. Hi Sachin, how are you doing?
Hi Stacey, I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
So, Sachin, I associate Nutanix with hyper-converged infrastructure, but what is it specifically that you guys offer in the Internet of Things?
Stacey, we've created an IoT application platform. It is called Xi IoT. And specifically, it's an edge computing offering that allows users to deploy modern IoT applications at the edge. It lets them manage these applications literally at planet scale from a central point of control. And last but not the least, it enables users to do data processing across the edge in the cloud for IoT use cases.
Excellent. So what is Nutanix's core mission in the IoT?
Stacey, it's about getting insights out of raw data as soon as possible. We see enterprise IoT devices are going to create roughly 600 billion petabytes of information next year. This is compared to roughly 15 billion petabytes that's going to be created in all the public and private clouds combined. So if our users can get key insights out of this raw data as soon as possible and very close to where this data is created in the real world at the edge, the better off we'll be.
All right. So there's a lot of data, and you've got to deal with it at the edge. So can you walk us through a customer story to illustrate this concept?
We recently worked with a smart cities customer, and they were thinking about deploying new type of cameras, license plate recognition cameras and AI cameras to figure out traffic violations or to track cars and so on. And we convinced them to use their existing cameras and all the data that they were already collecting and apply some AI processing on top of that data lake to get all those insights anyway without any more investment in devices or any more investment in time. So all in all, they could create this AI-based traffic management project. And instead of having to deploy new devices for it and it having to take roughly 18 months from start to finish, they could do it in roughly 3 months by applying software and AI techniques on top of data that they already had.
That sounds very cool. So if I wanted to use my existing data and devices to discover insights, where could I go to find out more about Nutanix?
Folks are welcome to visit us at nutanix.com/IoT, where we have many other case studies, and your listeners can also sign up for a free trial.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Rose Eveleth, who is a journalist and host of the Flash Forward podcast. I know you guys know that I recommend this all the time, but once again, I'm going to say, hey, if you're not listening, you should, because it's amazing. So hi, Rose. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me and saying such nice things all the time about Flash Forward. I really appreciate it.
I just love the format, and it ties really closely into what we're going to talk about. The format is basically you start with this imaginary future and you set us in it very adroitly, and then move to experts and you talk to experts about, is this future even possible? Which is kind of nice because as I read science fiction all the time. I imagine a lot of my listeners read science fiction as well. And sometimes it's hard to tell the narrative truth from the actual physics truth or the real truth out there. So that's what we're going to talk about. Recently, you asked the question, should we be using science fiction authors to decide tech policy? And I'm curious, one, why you asked that, and two, what did you find?
Yeah, I think a lot about sort of the ethical ways to mix fiction and journalism. And some people would argue that there is no ethical way to do that. And on its face, they seem antithetical, right? Journalism is about the facts and the truth, and you try to be as sort of accurate as possible. And then fiction obviously is not that. You get to make things up, you get to kind of like imagine worlds. And there are some people who I think say that those two things cannot possibly mix. But I sort of do mix them a little bit with Flash Forward, and I've been doing the show for about 4 years now. And so I've had a lot of time to think about what the perils might be and what the problems might be. And even very early on in the show, there was a situation where actually Rush Limbaugh took the show very literally and thought that, in fact, liberals, in fact, wanted to genetically engineer babies to be more sort of like climate friendly. And this was an episode that I had done that was based on a paper, a sort of provocative philosophy paper that some philosophers had written, sort of saying, okay, well, if it seems like we're not going to do anything about climate change and emissions and CO2 and greenhouse gases, maybe what we should do is actually genetically engineer humans to be easier on the climate, essentially make us smaller, give us night vision, give us a meat allergy so we stop eating meat. And the actual episode sort of starts with, like you said, like a fictional thing where this is happening, and then very quickly pulls back to talking about how this is a terrible idea, very difficult and totally unethical, right? And so the whole episode was really a takedown kind of this paper and of this idea. And what happened was Rush Limbaugh didn't listen to the whole show, took it as kind of a real thing that people really wanted to do or were actually doing, and then talked about it at length on his radio show. And so I think that's the danger that people worry about when they talk about mixing these things and thinking about how to use fiction in a responsible way. And it's something I think about all the time. And it sort of sounds funny, like, oh, haha, Rush Limbaugh thought we were going to like genetically engineer babies to be smaller and have more fur or whatever. And that sounds sort of funny, except that then when you start to think about that in the context of fake news and of distrust of media and all this other stuff, it sort of very quickly becomes not funny. And so fast forward, or flash forward, if you will, to recently, there have been a lot of companies coming to me and sort of saying, hey, we're really interested in world building. We're really interested in using the tools of futurism, and particularly using the tools of science fiction to think about the future, whether that's in a policy think tank context or a business context. And there's been this kind of boom in turning to sci-fi writers to do that. And I had just some questions about, like, are science fiction writers, in fact, qualified to be consulting in some of these situations about national policy, foreign policy, some of these big, hard, really complicated questions? And B, what does it mean when we start to write these narratives in those situations where you have people who are going to then go take these ideas and think about actual policy or actual sort of business changes? And like, what does that actually mean? Do these writers, and sort of, I've been asked to do this too, do those of us who get asked to do this, are we doing a good job, or should we be sort of wary of maybe over-determining the future and sort of making it seem like it's already predetermined? Here's the story. And stories, especially when they're good, when they're well written, and many science fiction writers are quite good at what they do, they can feel inevitable. They can make this future feel like, of course, this is what's going to happen. When, of course, we all know that nobody can actually predict the future. That's not a thing we can do. So I was just really interested in grappling with this question of how do you use some of these really powerful tools of world building and of fiction and thinking about the future in these really interesting narrative ways, particularly when it comes to, we can talk about, Internet of Things and like risk and helping people understand what this might look like when it hasn't happened yet, to kind of get them to understand maybe what the policy should be, but also without kind of like overstating what we know right now and what we kind of can say about what might happen. And I think that, it's a hard question, and it's, some people took my piece, I wrote a piece in Wired about this, and some people took my piece as sort of arguing that like we should never do this and science fiction writers shouldn't be involved in this. And I don't actually think that. I think it's more that I want us to be very aware of what we're doing and what it means when we talk about these things and sort of what the impacts might be, whether we want them or not.
I took from it a couple things. One, I took from it the idea that you can't predict the future. too, there are probably some areas where having a narrative flow makes sense. So I think things like discussing ethics is an area where being an author and being in science fiction could help because you're trained to think through the what ifs of something. And I don't think a lot of engineers think beyond the what ifs of physics, right? So if you're inventing something crazy and cool, you go as far as like, how can I deploy this, commercialize this, whatever, but you don't think, what if this gets introduced to society? Then what happens? And that's kind of the job of an author in a lot of ways, it feels like. So I'm curious, where do you think this can be successful?
I think that actually a lot of engineers love science fiction.
Oh, yeah.
I think they're really into it, but they're kind of into the Star Trek version of science fiction, which is that technology is always going to help us and always going to make us better. And I think that there's a narrative that I see a lot in these conversations about how to use science fiction. And it's sort of the assumption that we're not always all talking about the same science fiction when we talk about science fiction. So, when I think about science fiction that I personally use as kind of my guiding lights, I'm talking about Octavia Butler and N.K. Jemisin and, these writers who are thinking deeply about the impacts that technology might have on marginalized folks or on communities that don't have power, don't have money. But lots of people don't read those books and they instead read Heinlein or people who are much more optimistic about what technology is going to do. And so sometimes what I hear people say in these conversations is, oh, well, if we use science fiction, then we will have to think through the negative consequences of these technologies. And I don't think that's actually a given because you can use science fiction and only see the positives. There's plenty of science fiction that only sees the positives in technology, right? Techno-utopian fiction is everywhere. So I do kind of want to think about that too, because people will, especially if you're in sort of the circles that I run in, where most people, when they talk about sci-fi, they are often talking about these more sort of like nuanced, interesting things that really try to grapple with the negative ethical implications. But that's not what everybody's reading. That's not all sci-fi. And so this idea that in and of itself, reading science fiction forces people to think about the negative consequences of their work, I don't think is actually true necessarily. And that's another thing I kind of wanted to poke at a little bit with this piece, which is that is an assumption that gets made all the time in these conversations, that of course, if we use sci-fi, we will force people like engineers to be more critical of what they're doing and think about the implications and think about how this might impact marginalized people. But that's not necessarily going to happen just by saying, hey, read sci-fi. Like you have to be more specific about what sci-fi to read or like what kinds of tools to use.
I like that. Yes. And I think I'm with you. I'm reading the same authors. Now, I would say, and this is actually very much in line with what you've probably been asked to do, is I think it's the University of Arizona. They work with Slate on something called Future Tense. Yep. And they have actually had a bunch of authors come in and do things related to space travel, gene editing. They had a Smart House one that was really amazing. And they have both the story and then they have a feedback from an expert in that field or a response. And I think that's kind of a very fun, and it feels useful to me, but maybe it shouldn't feel useful to me.
I do think it's useful. And I think that area, right, that intersection between the storyline and the narrative and the sort of like, I don't want to call it fact checking because there's sort of like a strain of like, let's fact check this science fiction movie, which is just like, I think kind of annoying in general, where it's like, whatever. But when we are talking about, if we want to be talking about using these narratives as a way to help people understand reality and sort of grapple with what the future might look like, it is important for us to ground those futures in real research and in sort of what people are really thinking about. And of course, all fiction is grounded in reality in some way or another, right? These authors are not, they're making stuff up, but they're pulling things from the real world, right? A lot of science fiction writers are deep researchers, right? They do a ton of research, and some of them are themselves, researchers, right? Like Madeline Ashby. There's lots of people who write science fiction and also do journalism. Annalee Newitz is another great example. People who have that knowledge and kind of have that background and can kind of speak eloquently about both sides. But yeah, I think that this middle ground of, okay, we use the narrative to try to get you, right? To like kind of get you interested, and not just as like a ploy to be like, oh, we have to give you your candy before you have to eat your vegetables, which is the reality stuff. I think it's more that there are certain things that are really hard for people to understand and not just understand, but like sort of internalize and think about what that actually means for them and what the risks actually are. So an example I like to talk about a lot is facial recognition, which there's a million stories, right, about facial recognition out there right now. And a lot of people I talk to who aren't in the tech world, who are just, they don't really understand like why they should worry about it. Like, why should I care? You know, if the city is scanning my face at every corner, or if every time I go into the Gap, they're scanning my face and connecting me to some network of past customers and, you know, whatever it is. Like, why is that bad? You know, and I think that we don't have stories yet. And I say yet very specifically because it will happen. But we don't yet really have a lot of stories that we can point to in the real world to say, hey, like this is what happens when you let this sort of totalitarian state take over and scan your face every time you walk out the door.
Right. We're still referencing 1984, which was written forever ago.
Right. And like we don't have real world examples to say, here's what can happen when you let this technology kind of become pervasive. So we have to turn to fiction to be able to kind of help people understand like, well, it hasn't happened yet, but here are some of the things that you might want to worry about. Same thing goes for consumer facing genetic testing, right? A lot of people are like, well, what's the harm in sending my spit to 23andMe and having them come back and tell me my genes? And actually explaining to people what the potential harm is really hard because in many cases it hasn't really happened yet. Like the specific narrative examples that we could use to sort of say, hey, this is what the real risk is. They haven't really quite happened yet. Again, I think that's yet. I think they will and we'll see them. But, you kind of don't want to have to wait for that in order to kind of make policy or think about ethics about some of these technologies. You want to be able to do it before somebody gets actually hurt. And that's where the fiction part I think is really crucial and can be a really amazing tool because it can step in and say, okay, yeah, I know this hasn't happened yet, but based on everything we know and what all the experts are talking about, here is a very realistic future scenario that like many experts believe will happen sooner or later. And that kind of, I think, is the power in this fictional imagining. It's not necessarily in guiding businesses in what to do next or telling governments how to make policy. It's more in helping regular people and voters and consumers understand the potential positives and negatives of these technologies before they have to actually live through them.
Right. I'm going to stretch your brain. So I know that I'm going to stretch my brain too, because I've been listening to your show for a while. Most recently, you had a section on crime, and I thought that'd be fun to talk about with relation to the Internet of Things.
Sure.
We're starting to see, Wired just had a big feature on somebody that they were using Fitbit data from, I believe it was the victim, to help solve a crime. There's already been examples of, trying to get data from, we call her Madame A, but the Amazon Echo devices. And there's this current of news right now about Ring doorbells and surveillance in neighborhoods that actually we talk about on the show a lot of time because I feel like that sort of technology combined with things like ICE raids really become frightening and make people complicit in things that they may not be aware of. So what are the IoT related stories that we should be looking for and telling? And this is a broad question. You don't have to get all of them, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you've already hit on a bunch. Obviously the Ring doorbell situation is one that I think every journalist should be watching, even if you're not a tech journalist. And that is another one, right? Where you talk to people and they're like, well, it's really convenient. I don't really see what the harm is. And it's hard to sometimes explain to people what the harm might be without sort of going into, well, what if this were to happen or what if that were to happen? And then you're in your what if scenarios and you're in your fiction. And I think that is also really important and, helps people to maybe think about people who aren't like them. So a lot of the people, like you said, who might have these doorbells, they would not think of themselves as someone who is happy to help ICE deport innocent people or lock them up in the concentration camps that are at our border right now. Many of the people who own these doorbells are like, no, I don't like that at all, right? Like I'm opposed to that. And yet, right, they have this technology that is very clearly linked to those incidents and those places and the company that is sort of helping with a lot of that. And so I think helping people make the connection between their current situation and their very convenient doorbell and what's happening at the border, I think that does require a little bit of storytelling because, you need to sort of say like, okay, well, here, imagine blank happening. With other IoT stuff, I mean, I'm fascinated by the Fitbit crime stuff. I think it was sort of only a matter of time before that were to happen. And there was some really interesting fiction actually about exactly that a couple of years ago that came out that kind of basically talked about this. There was that other case where they were using a guy's water usage in his smart home about like, he said he was taking a shower, but was he really taking a shower? Like kind of to check out an alibi. I think what happens and what does it mean if, all of your data is accessible to these companies? And we're learning more and more too that things you think might be private are not, right? Like that there are Amazon employees listening in, on your conversations, and, things that you thought maybe just the machine was hearing and it was just flagging for certain words. In fact, like humans at Amazon are watching and listening to. And I think it's probably only a matter of time before, in the context of crime, like they do hear something. And then it's a question of, okay, like what is, if you hear what sounds like child abuse in the background as you're reviewing Amazon Echo audio, what is your responsibility as an employee at Amazon, right? Like, what do you do? And I don't think anyone knows. I think that's a question that no one knows the answer to. And then I think, again, like that's a question that people will have to answer soon. A lot of it is not about like, oh, is the technology the problem? A lot of it is these companies sort of, they have all this information about you. And it's only a matter of time before that winds up being something that you're like, well, wait a minute, why did I say yes to this? Was it really worth it?
So let me flip this a little bit and ask, what kind of positive fiction? I mean, because I am a huge believer in the fact that if we want to, and that's kind of an ongoing question, I feel, as a society, but if we want to, having this sort of data actually could enable us to do very powerful things, like determine exactly who in our community is polluting, for example, like causing air problems. And then we could actually do something about it. We could find them. A lot of times when we talk about like enacting policies, we're talking about doing it in a data-driven way. And we could actually have the data we need. So I look at that and I'm like, hey, there's some positive things that could come from this. I don't know if you have other positive. I know that, dystopian fiction is all the rage. And
yes, it's very popular right now.
There are huge problems, but I'm also like, what's good out there?
There's a growing wave of fiction that is sort of like hopeful climate change fiction that is sort of about futures in which we have actually done something. We're not living in the same world as we are today. Obviously, doing something means changing things, but sort of imagining like, what does that look like? Like, what does the world look like if we truly step up and say, we're going to actually try to do something about this, which some days feels less likely than other days. But I think that's been really interesting to see people, and fiction writers in particular, really kind of trying to think about what would that world look like. And, I don't think it's a utopian world, right? There are still net downsides and trade-offs and stuff like that. But it has been interesting to read a little bit of that. In terms of fiction that's about like technology being kind of like being able to use that technology to fix some of our problems. I'm trying to think of something I've read. I read a short story recently and I can't remember what collection it was in, but it was kind of about this, right? Where it was like, well, and it wasn't purely utopian. It talked about exactly what you're talking about, which is using it to catch polluters and stuff. But then there is still this question of like, where is the line between surveillance and the nanny state, as people like to call it? Or,
what if you're poor and the only thing you can afford is a crappy generator that is polluting? Finding people on top of that is not awesome.
Right. The thing I think about actually, which isn't a utopian book at all, but it does make me think of this because a lot of it is about interconnectivity and communication, is Infinite Detail by Tim Mon, which came out earlier this year. I don't know if you've read it.
I have not yet.
Yeah, it's so good. And like it's about the collapse of the internet, basically, and what that would look like and why people might want that. And I just think it's so good because there are certain scenes in it that just really, they perfectly encapsulate where we are right now in many ways, because there's the before scenes before the whole thing happens, and then there's after. And there's one scene that I think about all the time, actually. It's this tiny scene. And I actually asked Tim's a friend, and I asked him about it. And he's like, oh yeah, my editor wanted me to cut that. And it's actually one of my favorite things in the book. And it's not giving anything away. This is not a spoiler. But basically it's this scene where there's a guy who collects cans, right? And he gets the cans, he scans them, he gets the money back from them, right? Like this is a sort of like microeconomy in cities all over the world. Anytime there's a cashback program for cans or bottles, like you have people who do this. And this supplements their income. And in reality, a lot of these people have other jobs. Like this is a supplemental thing. They are often not homeless. They are just, this is something they do to make a little bit of extra money, because income inequality in the United States is truly astronomically bad. And in the book, there's this scene where you have this guy and he's like doing his normal thing. And the city has actually converted all their cans to RFID tags. And basically it completely destroys this guy's source of income because you can only scan them once and it sort of tracks them and it tracks you. And so if you're doing this thing where you get your cans, you put them in the bag, you try to take them to the machine that scans them, it says, oh, no, these have already been scanned. You can't get the money from them. You have to return them to the right place, or you have to do this or that. Just like that, with this one little tech thing where you just stick an RFID tag on the cans and you have this new system, you completely wipe out this income source for all these people. And this is not, you asked about positives. This is not positive, but that book has other positive things in it that I think are really interesting. But I think about that scene all the time because it is such a tiny thing that so few people think about. And I've seen proposals in cities to do this, just, use RFID on cans and bottles to kind of do this, the buyback stuff. And I just thought that was like an amazing little detail in that book about sort of how this touches everybody. So much of the time we talk about Internet of Things or technology, and we're talking about rich people and what they can or can't afford. And that is important because there is this gap. But like even those policy changes, they impact everybody and everybody gets touched by them. And I just thought it was a great little moment in that book.
I was going to ask you to end on a note of authors and people that you think are worth reading. So you've segued so nicely into there. So do you have any others?
Yes, I just finished Annalee Newitz's new book, which is out this month, I think. It's called The Future of Another Timeline, and it's time travel and basically about sort of like how we all shape the future. And it's about feminism, and there's like punk rock girls in the 80s or 90s in Southern California, and it's awesome. It's just really fun. It also raises some really interesting questions about who has the power to shape the future. I'm also reading a collection of poetry right now called Cyborg Detective. And it's written by a woman named Jillian Weiss, who is a disabled woman. And a lot of the poems are about sort of like disability. And she is so funny. And the whole book is just like such a delight. I'm not normally someone who reads a lot of poetry. So I was a little bit intimidated when I got it because I was like, I've been a huge fan of her work for a really long time. And I think she's great. She actually wrote one of my favorite essays ever about humans and cyborgs called Common Cyborg. It's an essay in Granta magazine. It's a great essay, and she wrote this book of poetry called Cyborg Detective. It's super funny. It's very short. It's like maybe 100 pages, the book, and it's great. I highly recommend it. I've been loving it.
Okay, well, these are great. Rose, thanks so much for coming on the show. This was super fun and a lot of food for thought.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at stacyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.